Hey, all right, we're back. Jack Talk Trades. I'm here with Jack Newman. Jack, we're going to talk, analyze model, some of the lines and line movements for the Week 5 NFL matchups, the slates. What games are standing out to you this week?
Well, like I say every week, for me, it's kind of like a opinion flow, a game flow. What it's early, so how much do you put into models? How much do you put into what the quote smart money and what the lines imply? A lot of things like that. And I think one thing that I find interesting is when I'm trying to figure out what's the overall opinion of everybody of a certain team is, I look ahead, a week ahead, and then so you can kind of say like, oh, what's the Tampa Bay Chicago line? Are they, if it doesn't agree with a model or something like that, and you think it looks out of line, you're like, well, are they saying Tampa's better or Chicago's worse? If they have too many points on Tampa or vice versa. So that's one thing. Like if you looked at like last week, if you looked ahead and you saw like Chicago, the model like Chicago looking ahead, and then if you went ahead to this week, at the same for the same line, the model kind of like Tampa, and so it's like it doesn't you don't really know where to go. But what I thought was interesting this week, is like you compare the model to the point spread, and the week started off where the line went from 3 last week. Can you see my sheet here?
If
So
you could zoom in a little bit, that would be great. There you go.
all right, so the previous line, the pre-week line, or pre whatever I want to call it, like the look ahead line, a week ahead. So this is like last Wednesday. Uh, had Chicago getting 3, and at the time the model was 1.9, and then during the week, Chicago had a bad. Tampa kind of had a good game. Brady threw a bunch of touchdown passes. I think some confidence is building publicly, maybe not the smartest. And so that line jumped up to 6, and it was, 6 was way above the 3.8 that this week's model had. And then now that line came back down to 4, which is like pretty much in line with the model because it's basically saying, you know, 0.2, and the model's telling you to take the Bears by, but 0.2 is nothing. So it's basically just it's just kind of a washout on that. And so, like I don't, like we've talked about this many times. Like I don't, there's not any edge here. Like even if you want to lean 100% on your model, which is ridiculous at this point in time because there's injuries, there's there's so much that's going to go into making how that we're going to find out more about these teams once there's 16 games worth of data versus 4 games worth of data. So you can't have like a model value, in my opinion, that doesn't like imply a certain percentage of inaccuracy. It's like when the weather forecasts and stuff. It's like it's going to change so much that you can't just draw a line in the sand. So if it says, if the model is only a point off the line, there's just so many reasons that could be wrong. The model could be wrong. The line could be right. That you can't go out and give 5% edge and try to make money. So again, there's not like a money making. If you want to play the game and bet on sports or something like that, then have fun with it. But for me, it's just a more like, what's my opinion? I like to like look at my. I think okay. I think that the model, early on, especially, and just what I've seen out of the Bears, when you have these lucky comebacks, so I could see I could see some common sense why that line was billowing out to 6, but then I kind of have to check myself and say, like, well, what about Tampa? Do I really like them that much? And then, the Bears are at home and they play on the weird turf, and they have a good defense. How does that match up? So there's still so much uncertainty in in the in these things that so I listen to these pick segments, that other people put out, and so I'm trying to do it with like a what Vegas is telling you. I'm trying to give you some clarity for expectation, like what to expect, and don't be so surprised. Like when, like I look at a model, let's bounce around a little bit here. So I look at, I'm gonna hide these up here. Well, I won't hide it quite yet. We're Viking fans. We're NFC North people. So you look at the Minnesota Seattle game. Now the pre-line on that was 9.5. And I think a lot of people were really down on Minnesota. They expect them just to fall over and die. And so they had a pretty nice game against Houston, and that line goes down to 7 this week. All right. So, but, I'm sitting here where I don't see a lot of home field advantage. So to me, the model should be a little bit more reliable. And Minnesota is only 3.5 points worse than Seattle. And is it, when you got a quarterback like Russell Wilson playing like an MVP, people are going to pile on that guy. And I think it makes sense that there's some value to bet against that, because that's people just living prisoner of the moment and stuff. Is like when Russell Wilson playing so outstanding, like chances are he could have just a normal, great, I think he's the best quarterback in football. He could have, like, it's a normal, really good game for him, and it might not be as good as the 4 games he's already played or what his stats are. So a really good game for Russell Wilson might not make his team that much better, because he's been having above that kind of expectation performances, and they still had a 1-point win against Seattle. Miami hung with them last week. Dallas had a lead with like 3 minutes left. Even Atlanta had a pretty game effort against them in week 1. So Seattle has not been this juggernaut, blow everybody away team. And he has been way above expectation of any quarterback. So to me, is like the regression, Russell Wilson should regress. Now, will their bad defense regress back to the mean also and kind of offset that? Maybe, probably. Seattle's a really good team. But in 1 week, 7 points, if there's no home field advantage, that's a ton. So if the model says 3.5, I think as a Vikings fan, as a Seahawks fan, I wouldn't go into that expecting like, a blowout, And I pointed that because we're Viking fans. I look at a couple other games, like Houston is way over favored. They fired a coach. Again, I think, Houston was I said this last week, you go back to week 4, and the most, overrated team, the juiciest line was 5.5, where Minnesota, and you look at Minnesota, end up winning the game by 8, and they had a 15-point lead fairly late in that game. So, anecdotally, does that mean the model was right? Who the heck knows, but it's like, I think, if anything, though, I'd be less inclined to be behind Houston. And I said at the time, and all the preview shows I listened to were like, oh, I trust Watson, I trust Watson, I trust Watson. Well, I don't know why people trust Watson. I don't think he's been that good. I think he's been flashy with comebacks, but, overall, statistically, performance-wise, and team efficiency-wise, he's nothing compared to like a Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. And people like to put him, because he's in that class and he's been good, they like to put him in that class as this elite MVP. Mahomes and Jackson are the last 2 MVPs. Deshaun Watson is not anywhere close to that. So when I look at, Jackson, and I think Jacksonville's been a little rough and people didn't like them at the beginning, but, the model after last week didn't change. It's only 2.3 points. You watch the Vikings game, there's no home field. Like, there was hardly any fans there. So there was an advantage. The Vikings weren't like affected by the being the home Houston. So I think that line is way too much. But that's just, and then the other big one is Pittsburgh over Philly, and I can see that, you know, uh, much more because I think Philly just has a ton of problems, and I think, you know, if anybody watched that San Francisco game, they looked terrible and they won. They had a good pass rush and that was it. And maybe that pass rush looked better because they were going up against a terrible backup quarterback and Nick Mullins, who was missing wide open guys and throwing pick sixes. But I mean, Carson Wentz doesn't look good. Philly has no receivers. Philly has just they've lost 3 offensive tackles. I think they're totally beat up. I think they've lost another offensive line starter. They're just a really beat up team that's been really bad. And even these models, see, a lot of these models still have some of last year and some of preseason expectation built into them. So this is a spot where I would say, like, oh, the model wants you to take Philly, and what are the reasons? Like, again, like, why is what I would look at is like, why is there like the Vikings? Okay, Seattle overbets the model, and I would say a lot of that's just Russell Wilson, just piling on that hype. And to me, I think that's not necessarily the way to go, because what are the odds he's going to keep playing out of his mind? And then everyone, like, said, the Vikings defense is horrible. Well, they're 13th defensive DVOA, so they've been improving. So I think that maybe I'd lean with the model on that. Of course, I'm a Vikings fan. Of course, you're going to accuse me of being biased, and possibly I am. But with the Houston, I think this is just a simple overrating of Deshaun Watson, just like last week. So I think there is maybe real value in taking Jacksonville. And then the Philly Pittsburgh, I think it's just too much. The model has too much respect for Philly versus like reality of injury and preseason expectation. And plus some of the model from last year doesn't account for Ben. So that to me makes like sense. We're just ignore that. The line's probably more accurate than the model. The other ones, I think the model's more accurate than the line. And then everything else is pretty neutral. Maybe Dallas is a little overrated. That makes sense. Dallas is always overrated. They're like America's team. And then here are the Saints on Monday night. They tend to be overrated too. The model likes, and I think there's been some of this too. You see all these minuses, right? This is another thing. It's like this model doesn't account for home field, and I still think gamblers in Vegas are, and I think they're wrong. I think there is no home field. So I think any team with a big minus here, if any of that's attributed to like Seattle probably is too, toss that out. So and I think if we look last year or last week, the actual scores of the home teams lost by 4 points. The home teams were favored by 24 points. So you were better off taking all the visitors. You came out 25 points ahead over the week, which is a lot. And it's funny, we talk about this, like there's like, when you have multiple points of edge, you pick up 3% per half point, or it kind of varies. But and this is where I go back to, like, this is not financial advice, because you need those extra points just to break even. If you're giving 5% to the bookmaker or to Vegas or to whoever, to the website, you need those extra points just to break even, because you're coming at it from a huge deficit. And that's the other thing I take. So everybody's running these ads for DraftKings, and they're talking about, oh, put your money in, $1,000 up to $1,000 bonus. It's right there on the commercial on the radio. It's like the free, and they say stuff like it's a free $1,000, and then they go, well, and they put in the fine print, or they say at the very end of the commercial, you have to have a 25 times playthrough. So you gotta gamble 25 times as much as they give you to be eligible to take your money out. Okay, well, 25 times, if you lose 5%, okay, 5% of 25,000 is 1,250. Okay, so they're going to give you 1,000 and they're taking 1,250 from you. Think about that. So by signing up for their deal, you're giving them $250. They're not giving you 1,000. They're giving you 1,000, and they are taking in the future, before you are allowed to withdraw, they are taking 1,250. Okay, it's a horrible deal. It's a horrible deal, because if you can beat the 5% juice, well, you don't need their money. You don't need the free money. You don't have the flexibility of taking your money out anytime you want. Okay, because if you go in, you take the $1,000 and then you win, you still got to give them back their 1,250. So you still lost. So in order to do that, you have to have an account. Now your account's locked up. They got your money. Just buyer beware. Like there's no deals out there. Now, if you want to get implied edges over 50%, and then you want to craft a way to make wagers with your friends, or just use it to like have some knowledge on the game, well, then every little bit of insight has utility. Or if you want to use information and reading, where the money's going, the smart money, the dumb money, the edge off the model, the edge off the home field, all that stuff, and you want to use that for your entertainment purposes, and you figure like, well, if I'm only giving 5%, and if I'm good enough to make up for that 5%, then I wash out over time and I have a lot of fun. Great. I mean, that's what I'm here for, as far as like to help people see it more clearly. I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking for, is like when I listen to pick segments, analysis, NFL Good Morning shows, and Fox, it's all clickbait, it's all hype, and so much of it is just so like wrong. It's just like, what I would advise people to do, especially if you listen to these shows, these podcasts, go listen to them the next week. Go listen to how Locked On Bears is just telling me how beatable Indianapolis is, and how, oh, Nick Foles did this, Nick Foles did that, I heard this guy, that was on the Athletic. They were talking about the Bears and how good they were, and he loved the Bears against the Colts, loved them, and then went on and on and on, all what Nick Foles doing. I'm like, dude, Nick Foles played a quarter of a game, okay, maybe a quarter and a half of a game against prevent defense. Okay, he got interception dropped that tipped into a player's hands. He had a terrible Atlanta defense who just gave up a terrible comeback to the Cowboys the week before. Like I was like, Nick Foles is not going to be playing anything close to that. It's not going to be against prevent. The Bears aren't going to be just chucking it because they're down 18 points and have nothing to lose. They're going to be playing the number one defense in the NFL, the Indianapolis Colts, and they're going to be playing it from a standard game plan. And it's not like I'm some genius, after the fact. I'm just saying what that guy was saying before the game was ridiculous, because maybe Nick Foles was going to have a good game, but it was going to be in a totally different setting, unrelated to what he did in 20 minutes versus Atlanta. And we saw the game, and it sounded even dumber, like after the fact. And it sounded it just seems so dumb for people. Like, I love this game. I love this game. I mean, what? How do you love, like, okay, Minnesota, Seattle, I'm telling you, oh, there's a 3.5 point advantage. And I'm also telling you, these models, there's multiple points of error in it. So I might only have a 1.5 point advantage, which is nothing. Like one drive can have expectations of like 1.5 points, and then you turn the ball over and you lose 4 points right there. So you had the 1.5 point edge. Oh, I turned it over. Now I'm 2.5 in the hole. It's minuscule. And maybe people don't want to hear that, but the NFL is so full of randomness. And like I look at a team like the Bears. If you're a Bears fan, your team stinks. Fine, in my opinion. But the fact that you're 3-1 and stinky teams can win a lot of games just by being lucky. So the Bears are in pretty good shape to make the playoffs as we speak, even if I'm right that they're no good. But I kind of rambled on here, but I hope this is kind of where what Vegas is telling you type things.
Yeah, it certainly is. 2020 is so unpredictable. Injuries are way up. It looks like defenses are struggling. There's no fans in the stands. There's no gifts, no deals out there by any sports book. They're not here to help you. They're not your friend. So hopefully you can play responsibly. We want to thank you for tuning in to this episode, and be sure to tune in next time on Jack of All Trades.